Hi, I'm James. I'm a grateful recovering addict and alcoholic. Today, January 18th of 2020, I'm celebrating 4 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol after 2 decades of chaos. Now, I'd love to tell you how happy and successful I am now and how funny and handsome I can be, but instead I'm going to talk about something a little more difficult and a lot more significant. I'm going to talk about my early years, what they have to do with addiction and recovery, and how they can help you or a loved one understand what you're going through. So kick back and let's do it. First, about this channel. If you or someone you love is suffering with alcoholism, addiction, or life in general, I post videos about addiction recovery, everything in between, right here on this channel weekly. Feel free to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, like and share to get this out there. Scroll all the way down to comment and explore resources in the drop-down description. I posted my story about a year ago and started this channel, and since then it has grown into a community of recovering addicts and alcoholics. So thank you for your subscriptions and thank you for everything. Now, this year, I'm going to talk about my earlier years. Drinking and using drugs, yes, but beforehand as well, and what it has to do with the disease of alcoholism. My story does involve a horrible car crash followed by a coma, an alcoholic seizure, and all the goodies that come along with all of that. I'll post those stories in these cards and at the end of that video, so feel free to check those out. My addiction and my alcoholism has taken me to jails, institutions, and damn near dead. And I tell those stories in over 60 videos now I have. But today I'm going to talk about my early years because they have relevance, I think, to the condition and the personality disorder part of addiction and alcoholism, and I'm hoping you can relate. Now, these past 4 years of getting sober and getting to know myself, I look back on my life and I realize my addiction manifested in ways long before I drank or used or discovered anything like that. I love who I am now, and I am relatively happy most of the time, and sobriety has taught me how to love myself, love others, and relinquish some of my fear and guilt. But even when I was a kid, I never really felt like I fit in. I never really felt comfortable. I never felt at home in my own skin. As early as preschool, I was chasing, troublemaking, cookie-taking, boys will be boys kind of boy. I was chasing girls, spitting spitballs. I was doing anything and everything to the extreme. Trouble and being a class clown was my drug. Grade school, middle school, high school, I never fit in. And I don't fit in now, but I'm okay with that now. But back then, before I understood addiction and my condition, I didn't get why I felt so uncomfortable. I never got why I didn't fit in. I didn't get why I couldn't find my place in the world. I would get in trouble for scrawling curse words on the wall. Diagnoses were thrown at me like ADHD and learning disorders because I wouldn't be able to sit still. And you know what? That is common in people, and so is addiction. And I realize now that, for lack of a better overall diagnosis of a very complex condition that is the human personality, we're going to call this condition alcoholism. I did drugs, various drugs, everything from opiates to hallucinogens, but alcohol has always been my drug of choice. And even before I discovered getting high or getting drunk, alcoholism was a condition that affected my life. As addicts and alcoholics, we find our drug of choice, and that always ends up being what releases the most amount of serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, and all of that. So if cocaine does it, your drug of choice is cocaine. If alcohol does it, your drug of choice is alcohol. It's different for every addict. But before I discovered any of that or had access to it, I would seek out trouble. I got high off of trouble, rebelling, In hindsight, I recognize that now as searching for gratification, instant gratification, some sort of high, some sort of serotonin boost. Now, before you jump into that kid needs a spanking, my misbehavior wasn't due to a lack of discipline or guidance from my parents. My old man, an ex-Marine with a huge heart, cares for family, very sentimental, and has a fondness for life lesson teaching moments. And my mother was equally as loving, caring, and a huge caring heart as well. But after that, their commonalities just faded. They separated when I was 2, and my dad remarried, and I saw my mother every other weekend, and I spent the majority of the time with my new family, step family. You know, there is the question, is addiction and alcoholism genetic, nurture, or nature? And you know what? It's both. I did a video on that. You can check it out. It's nature and nurture. I had alcoholism and addiction in my blood. Let's face it, it's a hard world. No matter who you are, what you grow up in, it's a hard world. And if you have the predisposition to addiction in you, it's likely. Now, the reason I'm telling this part of my story is because it may help you out there, if you're struggling, to know that this is a disease and it is genetic. If you're struggling, or if you have recognized and admitted that you have a problem with addiction or alcohol, I'd venture a bet to say that people in your family do as well. If they don't, there's always exceptions to the rule. But let me tell you a little something about my mother. My mother unfortunately passed away September 15th, 2016 from lung cancer. She smoked her entire life, as did her father, her mother, her sister, and her brother. All of which, except her brother, died of the disease of lung cancer, or my grandmother died of cirrhosis of the liver. Now, these aren't weak people. Her brother is alive and well, having found sobriety over 10 years ago. Now, I'm telling you this because this is extremely relevant to the fact that addiction and alcoholism is a disease. While intellectual juggernauts are arguing on Facebook about whether or not it's a disease, people are dying, whole bloodlines are dying. So let me just save you the trouble and I'll read the definition of disease. A particular quality, habit, or disposition regarded as adversely affecting a person or group of people. So have no doubt, I have no doubt and never have, it is a disease, a disorder, a condition, whatever you want to call it. It's a thing that's more powerful than us and we have to address it. It's not my family's fault. If they had the information and the resources that we have today, they could have had a fighting chance. My uncle did, and I did as well. We're lucky, and you can be lucky as well, fortunate. Now me, I remember swearing off drugs and alcohol in science class in the 6th grade. My teacher was talking about chemical addiction, cocaine or something, and I said to myself, I'll never do drugs and alcohol, and I meant it. Little did I know that as soon as like the next year, I would discover that huffing rubber cement glue will get you a nice warm, fuzzy feeling. And then I would go on to explore more vast ways to do the same thing for the next 20 years. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. I once got called to the principal's office because there was a wave of middle school children passing out under their own free will by breathing hard and cutting off the circulation to their brain. And, well, guess who was the ringleader? I had discovered that you can pass out and feel warm and fuzzy for a matter of seconds when you wake up, and began to pass out this knowledge to my classmates, and it spread. I became obsessed with getting an altered mental state, a warm and fuzzy feeling. So around the age of 14, I had gotten into playing guitar and being in bands and idolizing cats like Kurt Cobain, and I went to my first parties, and one of which I had my first beer. It was a Foster's beer, and I had 2 of them. And I remember they were cold and huge. I had my first sips, and the warm, fuzzy feeling went to my stomach and to my brain, and I immediately felt delivered from being uncomfortable in my own skin to feeling, you know, normal and comfortable. My first order of business was flirting. There was the sexy high school girl. Here was my first beer gone. I was on my second beer, and here come my stellar jokes. And before I knew it, I was in one of my first sexual experiences, and it was great. And the very next morning, I woke up and I wanted to do it again. And I was chasing it every day since then for 20 years. The rest of middle school was a blur, and booze wasn't always available. So at one point I discovered drinking the DXM and Robitussin will put you on a trip for about 6 to 8 hours. I had already started surrounding myself with like-minded people, kids who wanted to experiment and explore stuff like getting high and rebelling and stuff like that. So it's important to note that I was seeking this something before I discovered booze and anything that got me high or altered. But around late middle school, early high school, I had been sneaking out of my parents' house and doing things that made me feel high, whether it was substances, booze, which were not attainable all the time. So in the early years, I would do stuff like vandalize, break the law. This kind of stuff was like doing drugs to me. So I would rebel and sneak out, and me and a friend vandalized a public elementary school and got caught for it, and I went to juvie. And I'm not really clear on when this was, whether it was middle school or high school, but I know it was before I was heavy into drugs and alcohol. And I'm saying that because it illustrates my point that this disease, this condition, is present before the addict and alcoholic starts using. The behavior patterns are there, and they were in me. So by 14, 15, I had already been to juvie. I'd already been through the system, to court, to juvie. And my parents did the best they could. Now, I lived with my dad and my stepmom and my stepsisters, and my mother lived elsewhere, and I hadn't seen her for 10 years. But my dad did the best he could with my condition. I also had another family member that was struggling with addiction, and that put stress on the family. I had already been to juvie, juvenile hall, detention center. I had showed up drunk to school. One morning, I would raid my parents' liquor cabinet, and I would top it off with water. One morning I drank a whole pint of rum. At that age, you don't know what amount of alcohol does what, so I just drank it and went to the bus stop. By the time I had hit the bus stop, I was sloshed drunk, and by the time I was on the bus on the way to school, I was just hurling, throwing up everywhere. And the bus driver ended up getting the principal. I holed up in the bathroom. They got my stepmom came, and I got expelled. So all kinds of school trouble. In that reject school, after being expelled, the school of other kids that were getting expelled, I discovered weed, and I smoked weed for the first time. Booze and weed wasn't always attainable, so I would just do anything and everything that got me high. I would steal Robitussin and pass it out to my other derelict kids. I was always the ringleader of the getting high crew, and I would drink Robitussin for the DXM, I ended up, stealing alcohol. I would go into a grocery store and just grab two of the biggest cases of beer I could find and run out. I, of course, was labeled. I already had a target on my back because I'm one of those kids. And the principal called me into his office one day, and this was around 9th grade, and searched my backpack, found weed, and called my dad. My dad, being the do the right thing kind of teaching life lesson moment, allowed them to take me out of the school in handcuffs and spend some time in the jail. My dad was always trying to do right by me, and this is for all you parents out there that are struggling with whether or not you've done wrong by your kid because of their using drugs and alcohol. It's not your fault. It wasn't my dad's fault. It wasn't my mom's fault. This is a disease, and it affects families and everybody. It doesn't discriminate. So anyway, my dad did the best by me, and it got to where I was being such a hellion that the stress on the family was getting too much, and I was approaching the age 17, 18, where I had started to talk about going to live with my mother. Now, I wanted to go live with my mother because it was a more lenient environment. Whenever I spent time at my mother's earlier in my childhood, I got to do whatever I wanted. And then my dad was more strict, rules oriented, and it was two different environments. And the way I was acting down with my dad, he played basketball with me out back. He wanted me to be on the football team. I later, after school one day, before football practice, went to my friend's house and we raided his parents' liquor cabinet, drank way too much liquor, and I showed up for football practice drunk, blackout, drunk, throwing up. Somehow slept in the locker room during practice, somehow didn't get in trouble that time, but when my dad picked me up from practice, they smelled it. He and my stepmom at dinner smelled it, and I was nodding and all that, and I was drunk. Again, I was constantly drunk or messed up or in trouble at school. I was constantly dysfunctional because of this disease. It is a debilitating condition of the mind, body, and spirit. There is no disputing that. I knew that early on, and that is what later contributed to my recovery. So around 17, I decided to go live with my mom because there was a more lenient atmosphere. There was way too much pressure on my dad. He tried everything, and I was gonna go my way because this thing, I had no control over. I've done videos on the powerlessness that an addict experiences over their addiction and their addictive behaviors. Well, this is a demonstration that my story is a demonstration of it. I had no control. My dad couldn't control it. I couldn't control it. That was the early years, and I couldn't control it. I was way out of control, whether it was behavior or using and drinking. I was way out of control. So I went to move back in with my mother, and she was ecstatic, and I was ecstatic. Like I said, it was a more lenient atmosphere. The first night I got there, my mother asked me if I smoked, and I said yes. I'm 17, and she was going to the store and bought me a pack of Marlboros, and I smoked. And then later that night, went to a college keg party, and I thought I had really arrived, because doing this kind of stuff in the environment that I lived in with my father and stepmother required sneaking around and some covert ops. So when I moved back in with my mom and started to go into high school in my hometown, I started letting loose, and I got into heavier and heavier drugs, acid, ecstasy, pills, more and more booze, more and more crime. So by this point, I had already been to juvenile hall twice, one for vandalizing in elementary school, and another time for getting caught with drugs at school. And then that all ran its course, and I moved to another high school. This is my third high school now, in this time with my hometown. I ended up repeating 11th grade, because of drugs and alcohol, and then stuck it out and graduated finally. But high school involved getting drunk, getting high, having extreme trouble fitting in. I wasn't a part of anything that didn't have anything to do with drugs and alcohol. After graduating high school, I worked at restaurants for about 5 years, where drugs and alcohol are very prevalent in the restaurant industry. I had been getting in trouble with the law. There is shoplifting, whether it was stealing whippets, whipped cream cans that have nitrous oxide in it, you can get high off of that, laughing gas, or stealing booze or alcohol, or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, always involving alcohol, driving drunk, trespassing, resisting arrest, stuff like that. Years upon years, that was it. And then I joined the Navy, and in the Navy it was drinking. Of course, I had to kind of maintain, but in your early 20s and late teens, in your early drinking activities and using activities, you have relative control, and it is still fun. I did too, but I was always pushing the limit and blacking out and getting injured and getting arrested and getting in fights. I almost got kicked out of the Navy. I got a DUI and went to Captain's Mast and spent 45 days in restriction I was supposed to be going home for the holidays, but I spent 45 days in restriction on a naval base. When I got out of the Navy, I was in and out of jail for various charges, and all in all total, having been throughout the jail system, I've spent close to 2 years incarcerated in my life. Drugs and alcohol and trouble with the law go hand in hand. So my entire life I've been uncomfortable and affected by my addiction, whether I was using or not, even earlier. And even these days, I am still affected by my alcoholism, by my addiction. This is a disease, it's a condition of the psyche and emotional and the spirit as well. I find my solution I found in AA. When I was 18, I took a look at my family history and addiction, and I had heard about AA, and I knew when I was 18 that I was going to quit someday. I had to. I knew I was an alcoholic. When I was 18, I was drinking every weekend, and I knew I was an alcoholic. I told myself I'd quit by the time I was 25 before I wound up under a bridge. So 25 came around, and I was still in the Navy and still having a good time and not under any bridges. So I said I quit when I'm 30. When 30 came around, I got in an accident when I was 27, drunk driving, in a coma, had to learn how to walk and talk again. That video story is up here. But by the time 30 came around, I was nowhere near quitting, and I couldn't quit. I'd started experimenting with meetings, but I wasn't beat up enough, believe it or not. I had already been to jail. I had been to rehab twice at this point, and I had been in a bad near-death accident and coma. And I still wasn't beat up enough. They say that every drunk and every rock bottom you hit is needed before you get sober, whether it's 1 or whether it's 20. Well, I hit a bunch of rock bottoms, and my final one was a little over 4 years ago, and I got to the point to where I was hallucinating, alcoholic hallucinosis, having delirium tremens. Years before that, I had a delirium tremens grand mal seizure. That story I also made a video about. You can find that in my videos. But around 4 years ago, I was experiencing the 3rd stages of withdrawal, hallucinosis, just relapse, and the consequences would happen almost immediately after beginning to drink. I'd been to the hospital a couple times, just bad stuff was happening. So I finally threw up my hands, went to rehab. I discovered some tools in rehab, including how to balance various areas of your life, independence, and something to wake up for, something to do. So when I got out of rehab, I got a job and I started looking to move out of my dad's house. All of this part of my story is in my other story video. The bottom line is, this is a condition that is beyond our control, and we need to employ a power greater than ourselves to solve it. I am agnostic. I have videos about that as well. I use Alcoholics Anonymous as my higher power. It is, and always has been, I have recognized it to be a power greater than me and power greater than alcohol, because it gets and has been getting alcoholics and addicts sober for 80 years. This condition is treatable. It is not curable yet. Science is working on it, but there are some medications that address certain things, including antidepressants, anti-anxiety. It is suggested that we are doing nothing but self-medicating by drinking and using drugs, which is it makes complete sense, but science hasn't gotten a hold of it yet, and until they do, it's treatable by spiritual solutions, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, also outside therapy, working with others, being of assistance to your fellow man. This is a powerful disease, and I hope you find what you need on this channel, in the big book of AA, or other places. Reach out to me in the comments or on my Facebook or Instagram. I still go to AA. I have a home group, I have a sponsor, and every day that I need to, every time that I need to, I practice the first step of AA, which is I realize and admit and accept that I'm powerless over alcohol no matter what, and that my life will become unmanageable as soon as I take a drink or a mind-altering substance of any kind. I'm powerless over that until science figures it out, which they may never, but they have not. Until then, I'm gonna stay away from it and maintain sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's how I do it. They have something, and I have yet to figure it out totally, and I may never, but I don't need to. It works. It has worked for 4 years, and it'll continue working. I do it through service work, making coffee, chairing meetings, doing stuff like these videos. I sponsor other alcoholics and addicts, and I just try to be a good person. AA has taught me how to live my life free of guilt, free of fear. I hope you found something from this video, and I hope you find something from my channel. Remember to scroll all the way down to the bottom and share with us your strength, experience, and hope in the comments. And subscribe and hit that bell. I'm doing live streams now every week. So until my next video, just keep it clean, keep it real, and just keep doing the damn thing. Peace.